As we just heard, Mayor Emanuel says the police shooting of Harith Augustus is a teachable moment for Chicago. But he offered little guidance on what that lesson is and who should be learning from it. On the one hand, many residents still harbor a lot of anger and mistrust of law enforcement. That was made clear over 3 consecutive nights of protest in the South Shore neighborhood where the shooting took place. On the other hand, police tasked with protecting these communities often have to make split-second decisions over who's a law-abiding citizen and who is not. And here tonight to give us their thoughts on this teachable moment are former Chicago police officer Brian Warner, who previously served as chairman of the support group Chicago Police Survivors, and Reverend Saeed Richardson, the policy director for the Community Renewal Society. That's a faith-based group that addresses issues of racism and poverty. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here this evening. And we've seen that video. We just saw it again, and we'll probably see it one more time. Brian Warner, as coming from the police perspective, what do you see when you look at that video?
Well, it starts with the human perspective. You see somebody lose their life, which is very difficult. A police-involved shooting is one of the most difficult and emotional investigations in law enforcement. If you step back and see it affects the community, it affects the victim/offender, his family, and we're seeing the outcry from that. There's one group that people forget about, the officer who had to take that action. This is a young officer who was doing his job, who's just out of the academy, who had to take that action and take that life because this person would not comply. When it comes down to it, it's simple compliance. There's enough tools and enough agencies out there that investigate wrongdoing by the police. If you think you're mistreated, if you think you're not being treated properly, step back, take that arrest, and then go and make your complaint. We have enough agencies that investigate the police. Had he done that, he'd probably still be alive today.
Saeed Richardson, what do you see when you look at that video?
I see a situation that draws up pain and frustration. I see a situation that we see repeated over and over again. And maybe the other question to ask is what we don't see, or rather what we don't hear. It's really challenging to hear people say that we have enough evidence to determine the course of action when we can't hear anything that happened. We don't see the pre-roll. We don't know what happened before the event actually took course. And so to make a decision about that, it seems really challenging. In addition to that, we don't know whether he has the right to be able to carry that firearm. We're jumping to conclusions about what goes on. We see a situation over and over again where an African American is engaging life. They come across an opportunity to engage a police officer, and then it results in a series that gets escalated from 0 to 10 immediately. There is no de-escalation. There's no de-escalation of the situation. It goes immediately from an interaction to someone getting killed.
Well, because there is no audio on that video, we can only take the word of the FOP, if we want to, that this young man was given commands that he did not follow. Do you believe that this situation revolves around that, or is there more to it than he just did not follow commands?
I said it. How would you, as a person in that situation, you're an officer, you give a lawful order to put your hands up and comply with my order. The man starts backpedaling, puts his hand on his weapon. What point is de-escalation an option here?
Well, I guess my question is also, Saeed, to you, is what don't police officers, from your perspective, get about the communities of color that they are sworn to serve and protect, or what don't they get in their training that you think that they should?
Yeah, so I think the first response is that there's not enough conversation around de-escalation. I see police officers all the time walking through our city, and I always see on their utility belt, I see a weapon, I see a firearm, but then I also see a taser. It's interesting that whenever this kind of situation happens, we immediately see someone pulling out a weapon and having a lethal shot that goes.
Well, this is part of Chicago Police Department policy, though, that they changed last year to stop using tasers or use tasers less from people that are fleeing from them. So is that a problem?
I think, once again, it goes back to the situation. Are they trying to de-escalate the situation? De-escalation is not just verbal. De-escalation can be a host of other factors, and we don't see that. We see a situation, we see immediately a decision being determined in a person's mind, and we see a gun that's pulled out. We talk a lot about the safety and the concerns for the officer. What about the safety and concerns of the person who is the community member?
All right, well, if this is going to be a teachable moment, as the mayor said, I want to focus on just 2 frames from that video that hopefully will be a teachable moment for both sides. Let's take a look at it. In the video, Harith appears to have gotten out his wallet and was perhaps trying to show the officers his FOID card, which he did. The police confirmed that he had a permit to carry a firearm, but so far there is well, to have a firearm, but he did not so far have what appears to be a concealed carry permit. In the second frame, the police officer, one of the police officers, grabs his arm just as he's getting out his wallet, perhaps thinking that he's going to reach for the gun there. So this isn't so much about breaking down what happened in this incident, Brian Warder. This is talking about these encounters and police encounters and building trust. How can this situation be made better? How can the relationship between the police and the communities that have a lot of mistrust for them be improved on both sides?
If we're going to Monday morning quarterback, I know the training I had in the police department over 20 years ago, and I'm sure it's even more extensive today with verbal commands because it's been so important the last couple of years. The whole time they're talking to this gentleman. Please show us your ID. Okay, please put your hands by your side because I said we're trained observers. If they saw his shirt go up and they saw the butt of that gun, or if they saw him adjust it and they know that he has his weapon, of course they're going to be on high alert and make sure that he has no access to it for his safety, for everybody in that corner's safety. You said he's a citizen in the community with a weapon he shouldn't have. So that's the type of people you want to take out of the community or at least investigate and find out why he has this gun. If he complies, says, officer, I have this gun for my safety, he's probably going to get a lesser charge. He's going to be out of jail in a couple weeks, and he's going to move on with his life. He doesn't comply, he winds up dead, and if he gets that gun out of the holster and starts firing, well, how many citizens' lives are put in danger?
The difficulty with that comment is that we're making a decision without having all the facts. That's the bottom line.
Well, you've been Monday morning quarterbacking, assuming things
we
all along.
We are talking about the fact that we have a person, we've just seen the card. We don't know the fullness of the detail, but we haven't had the opportunity to explore it either. So you can't make a decision unless you have all the facts. That's the most important thing.
But let's try to get to some form of conversation where we're moving this forward in a positive way. Is it disrespectful to tell the community, especially communities of color, to comply with the police, given how much mistrust there is out there?
I'm a person of faith. I'm a faith leader. I'm a pastor. We have a term that we oftentimes use, brings up a scripture, says, to whom much is given, much is required. We have police officers that go through the extensive amount of training that they go through. They're the ones that wield the bulletproof vest. They're the ones that wield the firearm. They're the ones that wield the badge. They're the ones that have the power and the authority in a situation. The first thing we have to understand is that there's an accountability mechanism that comes in that space and wielding that power. That's the first thing to understand. The second thing we have to understand is that we have seen the police try to manage the situation by themselves for the last decades, series of decades, and it's not working out okay. So we need to have a way in which community leaders are engaged, communities are engaged into this. And so a number of solutions that we can do. One, we need to have a system where we have a court-enforced consent decree to get the process started. Secondly, we need to have a way in which community engagement, community-based police oversight is a part of the situation. You want to build trust between police and community? Allow the community to be at the table of making those decisions. And then lastly, we need to have a way in which the police contracts are also being reformed as well. Part of the difficulty in this situation, we saw this in Laquan McDonald, police were allowed to collaborate and basically come up with the story we found out later was not necessarily true. It's a painful thing to me to look at Harith's death and to think that we don't know the officer who actually pulled the gun. If I were to take and I were to commit a crime right now, by 11 o'clock tonight, you would see my face on the screen, you would know who I was, where I came from. That's not right.
Brian Warner, is the answer to bring more community involvement into the decisions and the policy making of the police department and the conversation, as Saeed Richardson is saying?
Obviously, communication is number one. There has to be respect level on both sides, though. I said, if you ask for more police officers in your community and then more police officers show up and they see somebody with a gun and they stop that person and then you get mad because they stopped that person because he's just the barber in the neighborhood, the police don't know that yet until they interview him. So again, please comply and we'll move forward. The investigation will take its place and things will move forward.
You're talking about more police in the neighborhood, which is what this community requested and what they got. But in terms of the conversation between the police and the community and community input, what would you want from that?
I don't necessarily think, you can have people who sit on a panel. I don't think you need an oversight of civilians who know nothing of what law enforcement does every day. I've made this analogy all the time. It's like me going on a triage committee at Northwestern Hospital. I know nothing about it, so why would I be part of that? What is it you know about law enforcement? What training do you have? What input could you have other than let's communicate and make sure that you're more respectful? Everybody knows that, but it's a two-way street. The community has to be respectful of that officer's authority and put up his hands when requested and do so. If he does that and complies, this is a totally different situation.
So, Saeed, it sounds like what Brian is saying is that the community just needs to respect the policing there. But again, there's a lot of mistrust because of issues of disrespect that have turned violent and deadly. So is that just enough or no?
It's not enough. At the end of the day, respect is a two-way street. It needs to be given as well as received. I hear a lot of conversation about community members need to give respect. I'll be honest with you. Until you've walked the street being a black man in the city of Chicago, you don't know what that feels like to have someone look at you and automatically presume something.
Oftentimes, have people look at me the same way.
If I were wearing a different set of clothes and I were on the different set, if I was in a different community wearing a different set of clothes and I engage the police, it's real easy to immediately look at me and presume a certain thing. And we don't know. That's a reality that goes on. And it's a reality about what it means to be in America. It's about reality in terms of what it means to be in this city. The problems we have with our law enforcement are the things that movies are made of. And that's a problem.
Brian Warner, when you had your training, I'm sorry, because we only have a minute left.
When I put that uniform on, you perceive me as one thing.
Brian, when you had your training a little more than 20 years ago or 25 years ago, what specifically was handled at that time, if anything at all, in terms of understanding different communities?
There was diversity training in all the communities. Entering an Asian person's home and disrespecting them by going with your shoes. There's all types of training in that. The amount of training is there. The officers, I think, are doing a fine job. They said we've stopped over 10,000 people. We take more guns off the street in Chicago than New York and California combined. And we have 1 or 2 incidents where officers have to use deadly force. I think that's a pretty damn good number. When you have civilians at this past weekend shot each other at a rate of 22 and killed each other at a rate of 6, and then the focus is on the police, that's a little dumbfound to the police that you have a video that shows pretty clearly this man combative with the police, trying to flee with a weapon, and the police officer doing his job and now being thrown under the bus and people calling for his head before he's even had a day in court.
Brian Warner and Saeed Richardson, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave the conversation there, even though there's a lot more to talk about and trying to bridge this enormous gap. But thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thank you.